Hey, all right, all right. Hey, everybody. We're here live. Hopefully, you can see me. Hopefully, you can hear me. And people are coming on. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so we got YouTube up. Olivia, okay. Connie, we got Facebook up. Facebook up. All those up. All right. Hello. Welcome. White Supremacy Wednesdays. It is here. It is now. As you can see, we're counting down on our timer, and it's going to be a great day today. I'm very excited about what's going to come forth, and it's going to be a little slicey and dicey today. But I'm glad you're part of it. As you can see, I am your host, recovering white supremacist Michael T. Smith, and these are just messages and lessons from my heart concerning, highlighting. Maybe confronting white supremacist ideology, the stuff that hides in plain sight. It's there, but we sometimes don't recognize that it's there. And I think sometimes we see the outworkings of it that are very obvious, but the inworkings of it, I think, are what remain out of sight and many times out of mind. So this is episode 3. It's hard to believe White Supremacy Wednesdays, number 3, but they've been going okay. It's not been easy, certainly, to share this information, but I'm doing my best to contribute to the advancement of the cause of dignity and justice, and I hope you're as excited about it as I am. As always, we encourage you to share. If you've not shared, it looks like we're having maybe a little technical things with notifications on the stream. Are we still up, you think? It's not on Michael and Connie. Okay. Okay, well, we're doing the best we can, and sometimes the tech is smarter than I am, and there's been a lot of tech issues. I think there was Amazon issues and Alexa issues and all sorts of other stuff. It's the mark of the beast, people. Just get ready. Just get ready. Anyway, Father, thank you for this time, this opportunity to pour into people. Father, I humble myself before you and them. Draw out of me only what you'd have me to say, Lord, and let it be by your grace and for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So we are here and live, White Supremacy Wednesday. We're talking about, for a title today, the racist root, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, of the house slave versus the field slave narrative. So it's this idea that of comparing house slave and field slaves, oppressed peoples, dividing them against one another, classifying oppressed peoples into complicit and resistant classifications, and how all of that has its roots in white supremacy. And we're going to be starting with that today. And again, this is something you'll definitely want to share. We'll go to the iPad. Today we're going to be highlighting part of a speech from Malcolm X here, and I'm going to show you about a 2-minute clip from a speech. If you're not familiar with the house slave versus field slave, or house Negro versus field Negro kind of narrative and idea, we'll highlight that. Some people say, I have no idea what that is. What does any of this have to do with me? It has a lot to do with you. If you've never heard it before, I trust you'll be provoked and stirred as you listen. Well, let's go ahead and listen to the clip, and then we'll kind of touch base after that. So go ahead and listen 2 minutes, Brother Minister Malcolm. And I think this, we'll do the disclaimers first. I thought I'd explain it afterwards. So in my house, Malcolm X is a revered figure in my heart and in my home. My children are taught about him. They know him. They are familiar with his speeches. I did a class, we're a homeschool family. I taught U.S. history in full color, not teaching it from a white perspective, from a red, yellow, brown, black, white perspective. A great portion of our history in full color was dedicated to Malcolm X and to liberation and to his speeches and teachings and doctrine, his assassination, the FBI, etc. We talked a lot about these things. My mother, as a matter of fact, I found it. So she was at a garage sale when I was like probably Olivia's age. My daughter's here. She was 7. She's 17 now. And maybe when I was 18 or 19, my mother found this book, Malcolm X Speaks, at a garage sale. And she brought it home, and she's like, you need to read this. And I was like, why would I need to read this? I was right in the middle of ministry school and thought, why do I need to read this? And I have read it and devoured it. You can all the pages and hundreds of speeches. This led me to a lifelong affection, of course. I have a lot to say about that. But a hero to me, a mentor to me, somebody who's mentored me, a prophet of God, a man, a husband, a father, a human being, a prophet of Christ, I believe, who contended for the cause of justice, somebody I celebrate and is honored in our house. And so, with that, like all true prophets, you'll see today that he was a man ever in process. And we'll talk about what it means for him to have ever been in process as we get into today's White Supremacy Wednesdays. And let me say this here also. So as we talk about the house slave versus the field slave narrative, keep in mind we only know what Brother Minister Malcolm said. We have no idea of what he would say were he alive today. I had a idea maybe about 10 years ago as I try to contribute to the fully realized dignity and equality of Black people in America. My little part, from kind of an insider's outsider's contribution or an outsider's insider's contribution. I thought about these creating websites called Malcolm is Rolling and Martin is Rolling, and just the things that are done in their names and the things that are said. Somebody's getting high and drinking and, sporting a gun in a music video with a Malcolm X t-shirt on. And I used to think, man, somewhere Malcolm is rolling going, please don't put my name in this kind of thing. And then I realized I had no way to say what their responses and reactions would be today. And that I could not colonize those responses and reactions. So we only know what Malcolm X said. We know what he said. We don't know what he would say today. We know he was on a course of progress. We would assume that his thinking would expand as all prophets' thinkings expand as they get a larger and larger view of the divine and how it interacts with the physical and the metaphysical and the physical. So, I don't know if he would necessarily agree with the house slave versus field slave today narrative. It doesn't matter, though, because finally, my final disclaimer is nothing I can or should say today, or nothing I say today can or should minimize or diminish the reverence we all owe to him as a great prophet of God, a great American, a great human being, and somebody that is worthy of celebration and honor. So those are the disclaimers. Let's go to the video now. We'll give you 2 minutes real quick. The house slave versus the field slave. If you've never heard it before, buckle your seatbelts. I trust it'll be a blessing to you just to see him and to see his interaction with the subject matter.
I have to say this, and I'll sit down. Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" He was as sick as the master. When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes. They ate the worst food. And they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. Yeah.
So there you have it. One of the greatest human beings to ever do it. One of the greatest men of the 20th century, greatest human beings of the 20th century. One of the greatest Americans of all time. I don't know how you can watch that and not love him. I don't know how you can, to know him is to love him, or at least to know him through history and through his own words and actions. So the background of the speech here, as we're back online now, the house slave and the field slave narrative, or Negro narrative, as he called it, featured prominently in many of Brother Malcolm's speeches, especially in '63, Message to the Grassroots, etc. It's a very common theme in his speeches. His assertion, and this is important, what was he saying? His assertion was that the progress of freedom-minded black folks, which he would compare to field slaves, was continually beset by what he would, again, these are my words, status quo, complicit black folks. That there were black folks in America that were content with the way things were because they were doing well. The house slaves, they were eating good, they were doing good, and that their complicity, cooperation with whites, with whiteness, with the whites' oppression system, contributed to the delayed progress, the stalled progress. And he said, as was going on there in the early 1960s, as those who were comfortable in oppressive systems and doing better than those who were not, stood in the way of the progress of freedom-minded blacks who were pressing the gas for a fully realized dignity and equality. How those two stood in conflicts, and of course his teaching metaphors as it was in the old days. Now, Malcolm left little doubt during his speeches, especially at this time, about precisely who he considered to be the modern-day house slaves. He mocked them often by name. You'll see later in these speeches where he'll mock them by name or refer to them as the Big Six: Dr. King, John Lewis, A. Philip Randolph, James Farmer, Whitney Young, and Roy Wilkins. And sometimes he'll say the Big Six, well, boss, we this, boss, we that. So he really put on that kind of shtick and mockery, as he imitated who he felt were house slaves, the modern day house slaves, what we would call civil rights leaders. He very much considered them complicit in the systems of oppression, black people complicit with those systems of oppression that he called and used the metaphor of house slaves. So we must remember as we watch this now, as all profit and progress, Malcolm himself was yet in the clutches of white supremacist ideology at this time. He was still bound and blind by very advanced, highly developed systems of white supremacy that had moved him kind of in an equal and opposite dysfunction from the system itself. I liken his continual castigation of white people as devils, right? That's the dysfunctional overreaction to his lifelong indoctrination to the idea that white people were God. So in a system of white supremacy where there's white rightness, white righteousness, white religion, etc., once a person comes into that and realizes the deception of that, that white people are not gods, the equal and opposite dysfunctional reaction is to condemn them as devils. And Malcolm is very much in the throes of that ideology at this time. He had no way of knowing here on your screens that he was just a few short months away with this. All throughout 1963, of course, he's just months away. We get into November 63, and then, of course, the Kennedy assassination. And by January of 63, not only is he about 12 or 13 months away from the end of his life, he's now in a complete state of upheaval, not only in his political connections and the Nation of Islam, et cetera, and his life, his family, his livelihood, but also this kind of paradigm shift he's going to experience personally, spiritually, religious-wise, worldview-wise, where he begins to separate the idea of whiteness from white supremacist ideology. So whereas, whites were devils, maybe not literally, but complicit in it, he now starts to realize that whites themselves are not the issue, but the white supremacist, the racial supremacist ideology, that had he lived long enough, I believe he could have really schooled us all in and enlightened us in. And unfortunately for him, the paradigm shift, right, that he's getting ready to go through is one that actually recast him. I mean, he's the most celebrated, if you will, and, this is, I guess, maybe how he would consider himself. Well, he said, a Negro like me, the most celebrated field slave or the most popular field slave in America is very short order here going to be recast as a house slave and suffer the consequences for it. And we'll talk about it. So this is a very important speech. But our task here on White Supremacy's Risen Days is to recognize, right, the white supremacy at the core of this narrative, the idea of the house slave versus field slave. It is birthed in the Hell's marketing department of white supremacy. A white supremacy, even though Brother Malcolm was pushing against it, right? His response is a response to it, and it's like somebody coming out of abuse or any sort of repression. The overreaction is we're sympathetic to it, but it's not the full sober clarity that I think he would enter into about 12 months from this time. And our job is to recognize the white supremacy and then, of course, to resist and repudiate it, and to curse it and condemn it, not Malcolm, not the speech, but the corrupt, dark world that shaped the very Malcolm's framing of the issue. And, of course, we do this by any means necessary. So let's go on here and let's talk about this. We see this trope a lot, the house slave versus field slave. It's played out all the time. It's an ongoing thing. And it makes for great entertainment. It satisfies our bloodlust for revenge and all this other kind of stuff. And but it itself is a racist concept whose time has passed. The house slave versus field slave narrative is pseudo-historical at best and white supremacist fan fiction at worst, and we'll talk maybe about that. But anyone born, bred, and benefacted in white supremacist systems, right, they'll immediately recognize its hellish origin. I don't suspect And I believe Brother Malcolm was sincere. And again, I don't know if he would say it today. We have no way of knowing what he said today, but we do know he was in motion, right? There was a lot of things he said in 1964 that kind of uprooted some of the things he used to think in 1963 and earlier years. So we would have to assume that progression would have continued. Where it would have gone, Dr. King, we have no idea. They were stolen. Their revelation was stolen. But the spirit by which they spoke, of course, and the trajectory that they were on remains. But all people like me who are born, bred, and benefacted in white supremacist systems, we recognize that this contradiction, this conflict, this comparison between the house slave and field slave, we know that comes straight from the very ugly heart of racial supremacy systems themselves. Like the crabs in the barrel fairy tale, right? This is one I heard. I grew up in I spent from 17 to my early 40s preaching in black churches all over the world. And I will tell you this, black churches outside of America are not at all like black churches inside America, but the crabs in the barrel thing I've heard a lot. It's like the competition between black people. One crab gets out of the barrel and the other crabs try to pull the crab down and all this other kind of stuff. Of course, nobody ever says maybe the natural habitat of crabs is not a barrel, right? So it's the system itself that's agitating the conflict. And Malcolm is, in his innocence and his desire to advance the cause of black dignity and liberty, is pouring gasoline on very much a construct created by white people that then therefore creates the division and racial. So, but these house field concept has been anecdotally reinforced for so long. I mean, a black person gets promoted on their job, and another black person says, well, they think they're all that. And somebody says, well, it's crabs in the barrel. You're just upset that I got lifted out, and all we got to do is pull people down, no matter why we keep pulling each other down. It's the barrel that's the issue, right? It's not the crabs. It's the barrel that's the issue. It's the system and the structure that's the issue. It's not the crabs. It's not the house and the field slave, right? It's the system that is the enemy. But there's a white supremacist narrative where there can be created division among oppressed peoples that supports the advancement of the very system that is causing and agitating that division. And even today, this white supremacist, this idea of house slave versus field slave remains a effective tool in sustaining the ongoing subservice, right? So I like in white supremacy, people, talk about racism and anti-racism and all this, and I've taught on this on other times. Systemic racism doesn't take a human being. A lot of people say, well, show me where there's systemic racism, show me where, and they're looking for a policy of discrimination. It's not the same thing. The wheels, right, of this kind of disparate existence, what do they call that thing, baby? The meal, what is it? The wheel of whatever. Not mill press, whatever it is, but the grindstone, yes, has been going for centuries, right? And to have the courage to stand in front of it. See, this is Brother Malcolm standing in front of this grindstone, right? To step in front of it, and then to lean into it, not to lean into it to stop it, but to get it to slow down. Then what does it take to get it stopped? Then what momentum does it take to get it going in the opposite direction? So this house slave versus field slave narrative is, although it's issued in this speech we just saw as an attempt to push back against white supremacy, a white supremacist, right? Anybody that comes from where I come from, no, you're not pushing against it at all. You're just throwing gasoline on the very fire that has been created. So we still hear this idea of house slave versus field slave. You go to the farthest, you don't have to go to the farthest corners of the internet, but in every corner of the internet, people who are supposed to be modern day champions for black dignity and equality often employ, in the name of Brother Malcolm, his words, house slave versus field slave, and we kind of label, and you'll see week to week who's a house slave, who's a field slave, and it's weaponized, right? And so again, this suits the white supremacist aim, but it's time for all who care about the cause of dignity, right, to let this devilish doctrine go the way of the dodo. Again, on White Supremacy Wednesdays, I'm not really talking about how black people should or should not think or what they should or shouldn't say. I'm not saying this is what all white people think. I'm speaking for myself, somebody born, bred, and benefacted in white supremacist systems and ideology. I'm sharing the insider trade secrets of things that I just know to be true. And, it should be expected that the objects of oppressive systems don't always understand the mindset of those who organize those oppressive systems. And so I'm sharing insider secrets today. So let's move on here. Why is this a problem? Because the house slave versus field slave narrative foments counterproductive division among oppressed peoples. It's a useful white supremacist tool. And finally, it reinforces the two core narratives of racial oppression ideology. And hopefully we'll look at that today. So somebody say, you're talking really fast. I got a lot to cover and not a lot of time to cover. So let's talk about point one. How does the house slave versus field slave narrative foment division among oppressed peoples? Well, and I hope you can see that. Mike, let's go circle here if we can. I don't even know if we can say it. From a historic perspective, Brother Malcolm's framing of the social dynamics of enslaved people is supremely unfair. The house slave versus field slave thing, to kind of cast a division on Brother King and all these other people that, they're house slaves and, we sick boss and all this other kind of stuff. It's understandable. It's authored by racial supremacist systems, but it's an unfair portrayal of the real dynamics. Why? Because his speech makes light of the pragmatic complexity. Let me get another color here. His speech makes light of the pragmatic complexity of what it takes to survive in sophisticated systems of oppression. Right? I mean, it's to shame, to shame the French woman who sleeps with the German troops, right? You slept with the German troops, you're a compromiser and this and that when the occupying force. Well, that's one thing. But when it comes down to who's going to feed the children and who's going to feed the babies, don't ever underestimate what somebody oppressed will do to take care of themselves, to take care of their children, to take care of an ailing family member. And they come along and say, you should have been a person of virtue. But the pragmatic complexity of survival within sophisticated systems of oppression is something that is completely overlooked here. That whatever's going on with the house slave, we this boss, we that boss, is not a function of the person themselves, right? It's a function of the evil and the horror of the situation. Not only that, the house slave versus field slave narrative, it discounts the stunting, soul-sickening trauma that affects both house and field slaves. What do I mean by that? Well, it's obvious, right, that no free person in mind or body would ever aspire to be a house slave. So we mock the house slave, look at you, we sick boss, we this boss, we that. It's the crabs in the barrel, right? That there's a division between those who are being lifted up from the system and those who are still stuck, or those who are a little higher up in the system and those who are deeply embedded in it. The white supremacy ideology foments that division. But the truth of the matter is, it's not the one being lifted up or the one still in. It's the system itself, right? And so when this is repeated in modern times by people say, Brother Malcolm, so and so is just a field slave, so and so is a house slave, so and so is this, and but we discount that where people are falling in these social dynamics are a matter of pragmatic survival in a highly sophisticated oppressive system. It's ignoring the trauma that has the falling dominoes that have led up to these actions, which are dysfunctional reactions, oftentimes PTSD type reactions to a lot of stress and disorder. And then the fact that, if the system wasn't the system, if the barrel wasn't the barrel, nobody is sitting there in a non-barrel, non-oppressive system going, you know what I think I want to do? I want to go up there to Master's house. And so it's the system itself, but it's not commenting on the system itself. And even though I believe Brother Malcolm knew the system itself, I'm not trying to say this was the sum total of his thoughts, but I'm grieved because I see people who are champions for dignity now invoke the house slave versus field slave narrative with no respect to its white supremacist underpinnings and roots. So let's go on to B here. It foments division among oppressed peoples. How? Well, other than rhetoric, right, which is powerful rhetoric. I mean, you see that, and you can see by the crowd's response to it, right? Brother Malcolm's assertions serve no practical purpose for the advancement of black dignity. I mean, this house slave versus field slave narrative got a lot of amens, right? But it really doesn't advance the cause. If we take his word seriously, you have to ask yourself, what should field slaves do to house slaves? I mean, if the house slave is really the puppet hand of the white supremacist master, what should the house slave or field slave do to the answer is they should kill him, right? I mean, I see you are an instrument of my oppression. And so that's a very powerful thought. If we take Brother Malcolm's word seriously, what league should house slaves develop to protect themselves from field slaves? I mean, if the real truth is that if a field slave ever got a hold of a house slave, what that field slave would do to that house slave, right? That's what we're saying, is that, they are the enemy, right? They love the master more than the master loves himself. And that's, you go back to Django, right? That's what happened. The chance when we like in our flesh to see the white supremacist system, Mr. Candy and all that kind of stuff tackled and blown up. We like that. But in blowing it up, we've also got to get rid of Samuel Jackson, right? He's got to go because he is an agent of that. So if I am a field slave who feels like the house slave is my enemy, what should I do to house slaves if I take Malcolm X's word seriously? Now, I think what we should probably do, what should we do? We should look at the house slave and say, wow, look at how deep this white supremacy has poisoned the mind of the house slave. Look at how deep it has poisoned the mind of the field slave. Look at how deep that the field slave is wanting to kill the house slave, and the house slave is wanting to be an agent of indignity against the field slave. I mean, it's the system, right? It's the barrel that we should be targeting. That's Brother Malcolm always used to say, I try not to get angry at the puppets, but the puppeteer, right? Because he would see, they would ask him about, what about black guys in the 60s dealing drugs, abusing women, pimping women, and all this other kind of stuff. And he would say, I try not to get upset with them. I try to get up with the puppeteers. But who are the puppeteers? If the puppeteers are whites, because they're gods, they can also be devils. But when they cease to be gods, they cannot be devils. Then it's like I'm not mad at these actors within oppressive systems. I'm mad at the people behind the oppressive systems, but I would take it one step further. It's not the actors within the oppressive system as the oppressed or the organizers, but it's the dark powers themselves that deceive the minds. And remember, if the lies of white supremacy have taken hold of any minds in this nation, we ought not be surprised that white minds were the first victims of that oppression. But if we take Malcolm's word seriously, what type of league should house slaves make to protect themselves from field slaves? And this is a big question here because it leads to right here on your page. If we take Malcolm's word seriously, what are we to make of Minister Malcolm himself? And that's a big thing, right? He's making this. He says whenever a Negro like me would come along and speak to enslaved people, they would send a house slave along to tell him to calm down. They would send Dr. King along. And I mean, he says this, by name, that we had started a riot basically to overthrow the government. And the white man couldn't get us to step down, so the president got the house slaves to come in and organize it, Randolph and Kennedy and Farmer, et cetera. So this is the idea. But again, Malcolm, the kind of quintessential prototype of field slavery, who's non-complicit, who I don't think he was a cruel man at all. I don't think he ever preached hate, not one single bit. The love of Christ was obvious. The love of God was obvious in him. Again, to anybody who would care to see beyond the caricature of the news and slanted history. But what should we make of Brother Malcolm himself? It's very interesting. When Brother Malcolm was assassinated, nobody high up in the Nation of Islam, although certain people grieved, nobody high up was shocked by it, right? Now we know the FBI's involvement, the agitation, again, the agitation of the system to pit blacks against one another, right? But there's not a lot of repentance coming out of the higher ups in the Nation of Islam. Even to this day, they'll say, look, I hate what happened, but he turned on our spiritual father. And this is what had to happen. And if you've been connected to a man of God, a prophet of God that you dearly love, like Elijah Muhammad or like my spiritual dad, and somebody has raised you up out of all sorts of bondage and taught you the ways of God and you're free, you do get those feelings when somebody betrays, that it's a traitor, right? And it does agitate that moral impulse to loyalty like we've talked about other weeks. And so, they feel bad that Malcolm died, but they can understand why. And it's an interesting quote from Elijah Muhammad himself. I want you to think about this. Malcolm fell out from us, he says. Malcolm fell out from us as a hypocrite. And what did he do? He went out and joined white people, and he worshiped them. I mean, these are powerful words. He went out and joined white people and worshiped them, and he started preaching that white people were good. So what happened? Malcolm, who was seen as a quintessential prototype, archetype of field slavery, in his death was recast as a house slave. He went out and joined the white people. So the us versus them idea of it's the us, real, authentic blacks, authentic Negroes who are against white oppression. We're also against those blacks who are complicit with white suppression. And then those very words, they crucified Brother Malcolm in that same, with those same unjust ideas. So let's move on here a little bit further. So in modern day application, Brother Malcolm's words are used for three things. You can see it at the top of your page here. First, they weaponize blackness, right? So when I get to determine who's really black and who's not through the house slave, field slave narrative, I can weaponize blackness. Not only that, but I can deprive black people of agency. If you're black and you have a different thought than me, who is also black, I can determine whether or not you're genuinely black, and I can determine, and I can say, I can say, if I'm a house slave, I can say your blackness is standing in the way of your logic. Or if I'm a field slave, I can say, the white man is deceiving you out of your true identity. So I can weaponize blackness and I can take away agency because if you disagree with me, you are either for or against black people. And finally, it can minimize the ongoing effects of systemic oppression. So you'll see the field slave, right? The field slave will say to the house slave, I deem you an Uncle Tom, right? I deem you a traitor, want to be white, you forgot who you are. But that's not the only place where the name calling is, right? On the other side, the house slave will say, come on, you're just jealous, right? You're sorry and you're stuck and you're bitter and you stop playing the eternal victim. So the division, right? As long as we amplify and hold to this narrative without recognizing its white supremacist origins, these divisions continue to play out and unfold. And at the root of this, and this is what's so sad, from a white supremacist perspective, I don't care what you call, right? I mean, I don't care what arose by any other name. White people and the organizers of white supremacist systems don't look at it and try to determine the worth of a house slave or a field slave or one black or another. These names and these things like that, they all support kind of the overall otherness idea. And in the inward is wrapped up that idea of otherness. And even though white people, like myself, are raised with that word. Not all, I'm not speaking for all white people, but many of us are raised with that word. And even though the word is no longer allowed to be on our lips, the construct in which it represents it, it very much echoes. And so it's not that, we may have stopped saying it, but it's not only stop saying it, we're trying to stop seeing the world through those lens, through the otherness of it instead of the we-ness. And so this back and forth, right, of, the field slave casting the house slave in one sense, and the house slave casting the field slave. But from the white supremacist perspective, it's all slave to us, right? It's all other to us. And of course, the fighting back and forth just advances the darker cause. So somebody say we're out of time. Yeah, well, maybe we are. Let's go here a little bit further. It's only 12:30. Okay. So in the present day, Brother Malcolm's words are used haphazardly and recklessly, right, to highlight distinctions and amplify divisions between oppressed people in every corner of the struggle. And I see this all the time. I mean, you'll see on the internet, right? You go to one corner of the internet, and these people, are labeled house slaves. Oh man, there they go, the house slaves, the Uncle Toms, just like Brother Malcolm said, every time we try to get free, so. And then, you have people that think, these are definitely the field slaves, right? These are the people that will stand up and they don't care about the white man and blah, 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 blah. And then, depending on what corner of the internet, you have kind of this hybrid of these house slaves and field clothes. Some people, you go to the internet, and people are celebrated as truly free. Some people are celebrated over here as truly free, and then some people are celebrated here, as giving an illusion of freedom, but are very much complicit with white supremacist systems. And so that's it. I mean, who is who, right? I mean, who is Brother Malcolm? And day to day, depending on where you go. Who's sometimes people are down for the cause, and then sometimes they're complicit with the cause, and then sometimes they'll speak verbally for the cause, and sometimes they'll comply with the cause, or, and you can almost hear Brother Malcolm, we gangsters, boss, we criminals, boss. I mean, this kind of thing, this idea of the black criminal and the white Jewish entertainment company saying, put this idea out and look how much we're making for each other, and isn't this good? You have to wonder, who is the house slave? Who is the field slave? Well, it doesn't really matter. Why? Because the never-ending labeling and infighting, all it does is result in the loss of the empathetic capacity to see and hear one another. So it doesn't matter what corner of the internet you hang out on. There's somebody that's saying Obama and Diddy and Garza and Sewell. I mean, everybody's giving a label here based on Malcolm's authority, right? But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, all it does is undermine our ability to see and hear one another. So the house slave says, look, get off your whole, I'm oppressed and I'm a victim thing. I'm striving in the same system you say is so oppressive. You don't know how oppressive it is. I'm striving. But the field slave counters, look, none of us are free until all of us are free. I'm glad you're doing well, but you just can't get yours and forget about us. I mean, it's the ongoing idea, right? And then the field slave says, you need to stop thinking and acting white, right? Remember who you are. But the field slave says, wait a minute. A house slave says, wait a minute. Groupthink is its own form of oppression. I don't have to think that way just because of the melanin level of my skin. So again, the division, right? And the field slave says, don't you see that white people are destroying us? And the house slave says, well, listen, we do plenty to destroy ourselves. It's this ongoing division sourced in I don't think it's certainly not an idea that Malcolm invented, but Malcolm kind of cauterized it and memorialized it in our cultural consciousness, and now we can weaponize this blackness and who is and who isn't without realizing that we're all citizens of goodwill are striving towards the same cause, the fully realized dignity and equality of blacks in America. And it's interesting, I know some of you are watching this, he don't know, it's just the white man trying to divide us. You're insane. You're absolutely insane. You probably still think Willie Lynch is a legitimate historical fact. The truth of the matter is, what you're saying is, if you're a house slave, you say, well, if you consider yourself a house slave, then I'm right on this, or if you consider yourself a field slave, I'm right about that. You're just, like we talked about last week, taking different impulses to justify your core position, and I don't have a core position in this other than, as a white supremacist, all of this suits me and mine just fine. It doesn't matter who you call you, because this person here says I'm thriving with the same system, and say, yep, that's right. And this person here says none of us are free till all we're free. And somebody says, well, that's not true. And somebody says, well, you need to stop thinking and acting white. And I'm saying, and they're saying racial group. I mean, it doesn't matter how you all, quote unquote, are arguing. The white man benefits from that. I mean, a white person never comments on black issues, or black on black division, or black on black crime. I don't want to say never, with the mindset for the healing and the fully realized dignity of people. The reason people like me invoke Chicago or New Orleans or Atlanta or Jacksonville, the reason people invoke this is to pour acid on this idea. And then what do we do? Then we weaponize the black voice. We find a black voice that agrees with us. We find the black voice that supports the dysfunction. And then we want to pit these black voices one to another. And we all do it based on who I will have on my talk show and who I have not. And all of it originates from hell. all of it has come through the racially oppressive system, and we in America call it black and white, but you go to other nations and they have different faces on it, but it's the same demonic oppressive system. So, white people are destroying us. We do plenty to destroy ourselves. Or people say, well, why must I confine my identity to blackness? And then somebody says, yeah, let me tell you something. You'll never escape your blackness in this country. Quit deceiving yourself. You can try to shed your blackness all day long. When the patrol car pulls up behind you, guess what? I don't care about your degrees or what talk shows you're on or what podcast you listen to. You'll never. So it's the constant division, and this fomented division serves the advancement of racial oppression, right? So maybe we'll close here, I guess. The field slave, house versus field narrative undermines the very political, cultural, economic, and social plurality we would expect from a fully liberated, dynamic people. That's a big thing. Progress happens when black Americans become as predictably diverse as white Americans. Star, highlight, circle, repeat, scratch it like a DJ. Progress happens when black Americans become predictably as diverse as white Americans. There's a tremendous loyalty to Trump in this country. There's a tremendous loyalty to Biden in this country. There's tremendous loyalty to Republicans. There's tremendous loyalty to Democrats in this country. And whites are divided on the subject. And the more predictably divided black Americans become, it's a sign of progress. But there's this thing of, well, we're not going to make progress if we're not unified. But it's unification is a very small form of influence. It's a scale tipping influence, but it's not an integrated influence, which is why certain parties can cater to or not cater to different constituents, because you're going to vote for us anyway. Or we know you've got your vote anyway. I mean, and so because it's not predictably diverse, the same thing we just saw in the 2020 election with the Latino Hispanic population, that for the first time we're starting to see, look, we're not predictably diverse, that we can be moved, because the dynamic idea in the Latino and Hispanic population, that dynamic idea has got to work its way to the edges if we're ever going to call ourselves a fully liberated and dynamically diverse people. So when we say house slave versus field slave, we weaponize blackness, etc., we take away, we undermine, we kick the ladder out of the very progress that we would hope to see. There will be no fully realized dignity and equality for black Americans as long as field slaves are able to colonize blackness. They're not black, she's not black, he's not black, they're acting white, he's black on the outside, but he's white on the inside. We'll never get to that place because if I can haphazardly deem who is and who isn't black, which we also say can never be altered and taken away, that type of division actually undermines the progress that we need. It's fruitless, counterproductive, and dangerous, watch this, to affirm black moral intellectual agency on one hand while subverting it. So say you should be a free thinker, you should not submit to dictated thoughts, you should have that thinking, and then when a person expresses that, we say, I'm taking away your blackness because you thought different than me. All of this suits the cause of white supremacy. But it should be obvious, patently obvious to any and all people that rhetorical and actual discord and violence among black people, whether it's rhetorical talking about each other, whether it's actual violence, all of that does is serve a white supremacist narrative. Now, I'm not saying that that people we call house slaves or field slaves are right or wrong on the issues. I'm not saying that D.L. Hughley or Candace Owens is right or wrong. That's not my point. I'm saying operating within the narrative where somebody is depriving or assigning blackness, bestowing it and withdrawing it, and the legitimacy of it based on a narrative of house versus field, which is rooted in white supremacy, which only advances the cause of white supremacy. That's what needs to break away. I'm not saying that Sister Garza and Brother Sewell, that somehow we shouldn't contend with the things they're putting out into the universe. Of course we should. Ideas are rebukable, right? Mindsets are rebukable. But groups of people are not. You can't rebuke black, rebuke white. Black people need to take care of their kids. White people need to stop being arrogant. So you don't have a broom large enough to do that. You can rebuke arrogance. You can rebuke neglect. But when you assign a racial face to it or a gender face to it, or you've gone too far, you've undermined your own progress. And this, of course, is where I'm sharing all the secrets that the white supremacist systems do not want shared. So let's talk about the two core narratives. We'll go another 5 or 6 minutes. I see some of you are on. So we'll go another 5 or 6 minutes. So this is point 2. This is much shorter than point 1. So here's the thing. What Brother Malcolm was really doing was framing against each other framing response A and response B to racial oppression. There's response A, the house slave response, right, versus the field slave response. What is the house slave response? It's survival through pragmatic cooperation, right? We're going to survive by figuring out a way to be practical and cooperate. Don't ever underestimate the level of self-hatred somebody will move into to survive. You know, we talk about pica, right? Where a woman senses a nutrient deficiency and will go out and eat dirt. What are you doing eating dirt? I'm responding to a trigger inside myself. And so it's pitting that response to oppressive versus another response, which is we should overthrow it through violent resistance. So it's response A, the house slave, right? You're cooperating with it. And response B, the field slave, he frames it as the violent resistance, that let it burn. Well, I'll come back at you. What's interesting about this is Brother Malcolm framed cooperation, and I think unfairly, as cowardice and complicity. And that's, this is something that happened in in the Jewish ghettos, right? People went along with it, right? Or, they were told to move out of the house, and they moved out of the house. They were told to move into the ghetto, they moved in the ghetto. They were told they were going to work camps. And there was two different groups. People say we should rise up, and people say we should just keep our heads down and outlast. It's what we do is outlast. And so that's pitted against what Brother Malcolm framed as nobility in the true blackness, that, to walk in the true image-bearing creation as children of God, the invest in the blackness, that this is, that it should, come about through, as it be expressed through violent resistance. But here's the interesting thing, and this is where the thing falls apart, is that this cooperation was condemned by Brother Malcolm as whiteness, that it's the whiteness of the oppressors that's affecting you and causing you to cooperate and to walk in cowardness. But the weird thing about it is, Brother Malcolm also considered violent resistance to be a very white thing to do. So on one hand, it's like, the reason you're doing this is because you've taken on master's mindset. And he was saying, but the reason you should rise up violently is you should take on master's mindset. So he was saying, a white man, if you push him, he'll push you back, right? And so he would say, we need to act white in that sense, that a white man wouldn't. I'm only going to do to a white man what he would do on his behalf. If he was slapped or hit, he would slap and hit back. So there's this idea we should embrace what the white man would do, which he would not tolerate this. But then at the same time, this idea of toleration and cooperation was also condemned as white. And so that's really what's being framed and compared in the dialogue. But here's the real truth of the matter is, and this is, hope you've hung around long enough, a few of you have. The real truth of the matter is this. There are two core narratives of white supremacy. And here it is. Passive cooperation confirms the natural order. That's the biggest thing. When somebody is deemed a house slave and goes along with something, that confirms to the racial supremacists, see, even they know they're subservient to us. See, even they know. They couldn't believe that the Jews would just give up their wealth, give up their money, give up their possessions, and just leave their house and move. And in the white supremacist oppressive idea, in Germany, it was, see, even the Jews know they're inferior. Even they know they're vermin. Why? Because they did what no German would ever do. No German who knows the natural order would just let somebody push them around. We would push back. So the house slave, right? It confirms the natural order in the minds of the racial oppressor. And we say, why do oppressed people go along with it? Why didn't, on a plantation of 50 people and four white, a white family of 6 people with 50 slaves, why didn't the slaves rise up and kill them? Because in the white supremacists' minds, their passive cooperation just confirms that even the blacks know they're inferior to us, even they know they're the animal and we're the master, right? But the other part of that is that violent resistance, believe it or not, also justifies increased harshness and cruelty. So this idea of, we should be the field slaves, which stand up, which fight back, guess what that does? That says, it confirms this idea of, all the harshness and cruelty, the chains, the beating, the separation, we've got to do that to them. Why? Because in doing it to them, we're speaking a language, because you can see how violent they are. Historians say there's been between 250, 350, maybe even up to 700 what they would call rebellions or revolts, what we would call uprisings, right? But they all ended violently, and they all ended in great black life being shed. They all ended in harsher sanctions against existing slaves. Why? Because when there's cooperation, it confirms in the sick white mind, this is the way the world is supposed to be. The less is supposed to submit to the greater. When there's resistance, it confirms the white mind, which is what? We've got to be violent against these people because they're dangerous like animals. So when you try to compare, because why? They're non-white. So here, submission is a non-white response, and rebellion proves that they're not white like us. I mean, you have to see the sickness that's going on here in this narrative. But here's the thing about it. In the white supremacist mind, these are equal. What? If you're going to be the quote-unquote house slave and go along with it, you confirm what white supremacists believe to be true. If you're going to resist violently and we've got to up the ante to beat down and to keep people in place, all you do is confirm what the white supremacist says to be true. So the white supremacist thing to compare and contrast house slave versus field slave, it all suits the narrative of white supremacy, because white supremacy looks at people who comply and say they're doing what no white person would ever do. It looks at people that resist and say, look, they're violent animals. We've got to tighten down the restrictions and the violence and the harshness because they're behaving in a non-white way. It's a sick, demonic system that is really not about black versus black. It's about the deception of racial oppression and superiority that infects white minds, infects powers of the system, that seeps down into the objects of that oppression, and they start to parrot those white supremacist seeded thoughts as though they're revolutionary thoughts, and all they're doing is confirming the very white supremacist oppression system that is in place. Last slide of the day. White supremacy, and thank you for staying on with me, white supremacy ideology in America is generationally fortified and very subtle in its operation. So subtle, in fact, that most white people are oblivious to it. They don't even realize how deep white supremacy affects their worldview. They just kind of think, not me, not me, not me. You have to be awakened out of this, right? B, American white supremacy cannot be outlasted by passive cooperation or compromise, but guess what else? It can't be toppled by violence, war, or terror. Go to Pine Ridge, right? Look at the native people. Look at the indigenous people here. Look at the Americans, the original Americans, and see, they said, well, rise up, and they were cast as savage, violent, and I mean all but exterminated from the world. And so this thing, well, don't cooperate because the system, we can't outlast it by compromise. Let's fight back. And the historic record of fighting back is look at the indigenous people on this land and look at the continuing fallout from their noble resistance. This white supremacy is highly sophisticated. It's highly fortified. It's generationally fortified. And the supremacist system says, you want to comply? Thank you. You want to fight back? Thank you. Why? Because fighting back just lets me go back to camp and say, see how dangerous they are. So what do? Our only hope is, as a nation, is for citizens of goodwill, right, to unite in their dedication to uproot the enduring lies of racial supremacy wherever they may find them. If we come across an enduring lie, a leftover lie of racial supremacy, we got to confront it. This is why I started White Supremacy Wednesdays, because I see this all around me. I'm bored, bred, and benefacted by it, and now I'm just going to start calling it out and saying, here's what's really going on. Not that people don't know, but if it's like I just can't assume people know. So maybe there's 50 people or 150 people that watch this. I go, man, I never thought of it like that. It's deep. It's dark. It comes straight from hell. But it can't be, the brunt of the work can't be on them, right? Can't be on black people. Well, do what a white man would do and stand up for your liberty. Why? Because when I stand up for liberty, the white man, pushes down harder. It's going to take the brunt of this work falls on those of us who occupy the majority of the power structure. It is we who must push things forward, not they. And that's kind of what we do. We say, well, I'm okay with what they're doing, if they and them and all this other kind of stuff. But it's the us that needs to evaluate and understand the system and to appreciate the historic dominoes that have fallen. And finally, all worthwhile progress in this matter will come about by awakening and by action. And as I consider the whole of Malcolm's ministry, I think that awakening and action are the very heartbeat of what he was trying to do. So again, this is not a condemnation of Malcolm. This is me as somebody in the heart, as a multi-generational heir of white supremacist thinking, commenting on, I see so many people on the internet, so many people I love and respect constantly on the internet, in person, in conferences, in private conversations, labeling one another as these divided, oppressed peoples. And I sit in a room and I go, you realize this feeds into the very idea. You say they're just going along with it. Going along with it supports the idea that came from my Bluten Boden, right? Standing up against it. Go ahead and stand up against it if you want to. See what type of fury and see how many anti-crime. I mean, right now, watch the sway of the election, right? The elections are changing all over this country to people come and say, we got to stand up against this lawlessness and all this Black Lives Matter, and they're coming out here, they're just thugs tearing. I mean, it is fulfilling itself, and I'm trying to, from the inside, cut every chain and every cord, and all that is going to come about by a matter of awakening and then action. Somebody say awakening and action. Which one is the biggest one? I'll tell you from one of my mentors. It's not awakening or action that's the most important in that sentence. It's the and, awakening and action. We must awake and action. And again, I think for all of his ministry, that's what Brother Malcolm was trying to get us to do. And I don't just mean, I mean all us, right, to do. That's all the time that I have. Thank you so much for your support. Those of you who believe in this content, you can reach us there, michaelandconnie.com/support. Those of you who give, say, hey, this content, I believe in it. This is me in my house, right? I'm in my basement doing this. And if you say, hey, I want to see more of that content, a little love would be appreciated. You can find us there. You can find us on the apps. And we are so, so grateful for it. God bless you. Have a great, great, great Wednesday. I'm only doing 5 of these. White Supremacy Wednesday number 4 will be next week. Then number 5 will be the following Wednesday. Then we'll close out for the year and maybe revisit it. So this is my contribution. Thank you for listening. and have a great, glorious week. In Jesus' name.